And let's get that going. And so our goal in the next 30 minutes is to give you specific case studies so you understand what workflows you can build using no code AI, and then also break down platform updates and mental models so you can figure out how can you use this personally for whatever workflows that you want to use personally or professionally. These things scale up very quickly as you see. And so welcome everyone who's just been joining. Please turn videos on if you're just arriving now. Our goal is to make this, again, as engaging as possible. And so let's warm up the chat. We're going to use the chat through today's session for questions. So open up the chat, hit the bottom menu on Zoom, and just drop in where you calling in from, city and country. Let's get the chat warmed up. Calling in from San Francisco, California. Bailey's also San Francisco. Welcome. Laszlo's New York. We got another New York. Dylan is Seattle. SF. Love the SF crew. Welcome. Cool. We got major cities represented. And so, next thing in the chat, curious just what's your experience with no code agents? One, brand new, no background experience. That's why I'm here. Two, I got a little bit of experience, shipped some projects. Three, tons. I'm an expert. I've got production level agents right now. I came here to like jam. So just curious, one, two, or three. Awesome. We got a lot of ones in the chat. A two. Cool. I would say this session, we're gearing it for one. So I'm glad you all are here. That's why this is the intro session. We're also going to dabble in that two area with the case studies. And if there's questions we don't cover in this particular agenda, you can always follow up too. So what we're going to do, we're going to one, cover three different case studies, two actual examples so you can see what can be shipped with less than an hour or 2 hours of working in no code platforms. And the last one will be a marketing case study to understand mental models for what you can design and build. We'll talk about platform updates based off of new platform updates, how that actually can help you figure out what the latest functionality is. And then we're going to end with QA. And the reason we're ending with QA, we want to make this as personal as possible. You all are spending part of your Monday with us. We want to help answer the questions that are top of your mind. Feel free in the chat. You can drop questions as we go, and we'll cover them if it makes sense. And if not, we're going to use the chat at the end to kick off the QA. So feel free if you have any questions as we go along, drop it in the chat. And if you like a question, we're going to filter the questions based off engagement. Like, heart, there's reactions in Zoom now. Give a thumbs up to a question you want to see answered, and we'll filter that at the end. So if you're like, hey, who am I on a call with right now? I'm Michael. I've been in the accelerator space the last 10 years, helping founders raise $150 million, solving large problems in the world. I also taught classes at Harvard. We got Dylan on the call, who's co-founder of Worldwide Studios. He's got 3 times previous founder experience, twice
Hi.
for different YC companies as
Yeah.
founding engineer. And then his last company, he was the founder and
Okay,
they
thank you.
raised 10 million plus. So you're in good hands. We both are really passionate, both about learning and building while also figuring out how do we build the best virtual community. There's a lot of people calling in from New York and San Francisco where the in-person energy is amazing. What about that? What about that global and online community? And the one thing we want to get people off of, the reason this is a Zoom call, we don't want to just make YouTube videos where you're like stuck watching things after work or on your commute. We want to get people to build. And so that's our number one goal is how do we get out of the like passive online consuming mindset and into that active building mindset, which is so fitting for the age of agents. We've run multiple pilot programs in the past, automating science with Opentrons, AI and global health with a nonprofit in Ghana. The biggest gap we've seen in the last 2 years, just for example, the global health program, when voice agents APIs became really functional around October, November last year, there were so many use cases in healthcare and even full time, full stack engineers, software engineers, developers, they're like, no, I don't know how to do that. It's like, we know it's brand new. Don't you want to figure it out? And the answer was, no, I'm just going to keep cooking what I'm cooking. I'm going to stay in my lane. And so what we've seen is the biggest gap is the tools are updating quicker than people want to build. So our main goal is figure out what do 2 week sprints look like so you can actually stay up to date and ship things. We'll share more about that at the end, but that's the reason we want to do these community workshops and demo nights is our goal is to get people to build. And there really is a frequency that has to be updated every 2 weeks. So we got 3 main sections. We're going to start with the case studies. All of the case studies I'm going to show you are possible via no code platform. So we're not going to bait and switch talking about a startup. This is all possible with current platforms. Because we got a lot of people who are new to agents, you're just going to set the ground rules. This isn't a technical debate of agents can only be autonomous like self-driving cars. For us, AI agents are any LLM-powered system that can run independently, or you can predefine the workflow and have control of what that looks like. And the thing that sets an agent apart from just like a chat call, just saying, hey, chat, give me this answer, Agents have access to different tools and functions. So you can give them memory, they can remember in the conversation, they can plan. So they have like a thinking function to figure out like what's the best workflow to use. You can give them access to tools. Tools can be things like scheduling appointments on Google Calendar, sending emails, Slack messages, making API calls. And then lastly, they can act based off of that. So it's not just, hey, I recommend to you to schedule this Google Calendar, can actually send out the appointment on both calendars. So that's what really makes agents unique is access to all these different things to then make decisions on how to act. What gets really interesting is if you think of one AI agent as a digital worker doing one workflow, when you start combining agents, you get a digital assembly line, like a factory. So you can really start doing complex workflows. That's where the value of agents compound, and where you can start doing some really interesting autonomous workflows. So this is a specific example of a resume parser. And rather than just saying, hey, rate this resume and be done with it, you can see for the resume parser itself, it actually can use natural language. So there's 3 nodes, 3 agents in this workflow: resume parser, GitHub web agent, LinkedIn web agent. For the resume parser, the screenshot on the right, it's an agent analyzer that feeds it takes an image of the PDF submitted, runs it through Google, and you can actually change what that evaluation is based off of seniority of the role or kind of role. So you have a natural language output that's as if you just talk to someone in your HR recruiting team. Based off of that, it structures it as an output that can then be parsed and updated back to a database. And the reason this workflow is interesting is if there's any information missing, you can actually do like an enrichment based off of what their activity is on GitHub or their activity and background is on LinkedIn to get that complement of, I don't want just what they're saying in their resume. I want to see what they say outside of their resume. So this is just an example of multiple agents that have sub workflows and they're able to hand off tasks or all speak to the same. In this case, it's a Google Sheet database. They speak to the same database. So the just main takeaway here is you can connect different agents for more complex workflows. And so when looking at the last couple months, anyone here use Bordy? Just give me a physical thumbs up if anyone used Bordy. All right, we got a couple people. Some people are like, what is Bordy? Bordy is probably one of the most interesting applications of voice agents. It was one of the first. You can think of it as a no interface LinkedIn that's actually helpful for you. So Bordy is a phone agent. You call it and you have 5-10 minute conversations updating it on your background, where you're at. And Bordy just has one goal. It listens to you and it tries to make an intro for you after the conversation. And so the reason I'm highlighting Bordy is most people are like, yeah, I can understand the interaction one-to-one. Like if I have a network and someone's like, hey, can I get introduced to someone who's built like email agents? So yeah, I'll make that intro. For Bordy, having hundreds and thousands of calls in the week, it now just has a huge active database of what people are looking for to connect. And in the back end, after the phone call, it does double opt-in. So it has best practices just like a human would, where it'll check in, hey, do you want to connect with Michael? And if someone says no, Bordy's like, hey, it's not a fit right now, I'm going to keep looking. So Bordy's a really interesting example. They raised $3 million last year. It's a Toronto-based company. They just closed an $8 million round. And their headline for their latest round is that Bordy closed his own round. So Bordy having calls with investors. Investors are like, wait, this is amazing. This is like a taste of the future. Like, what are you doing? And you're like, well, I'm actually a VC funded startup and I might raise my next round soon. And so there's a whole thing online you can check out where Bordy as a voice agent help the team connect to investors and raise its round. And the reason I bring up Bordy is most people here for no code, you might not have the $3 million budget or the dev team to do something like that. And you don't need to. So this has never been more true in the advent of large language models. Karpathy, who is the head of AI at Tesla and also worked at OpenAI, 2023 is just like, hey, the hottest new programming language is in English. That's never been more true for even AI agents. Every major no-code platform now has voice agent functionality. So you can build something like Bordy for your business. If you're an architect, you could build a customer support agent for people who have general queries before they get into project phase. If you have a bunch of clients and there's just a huge database of references you want to be able to support them with or schedule appointments, you can also build something like that. 3 main platforms that we've filtered for best place to get started. Lindy AI, which will show you some examples. That's the simplest. If you just have a half hour, an hour this week and you want to build, we recommend Lindy. It has all the integrations in for you. If you've got like really like complex large workflows where you just want to automate a lot of things, Gumloop is the best factory builder because it's designed to just do a lot of work. And then if you want functionality and the ability to self-host because data is important, data privacy is important, or you want to be as efficient as possible, n8n is the best flexible platform. So we'll go through some examples with Lindy. If you have any questions, we can happy to answer them at the QA. But just the main takeaway here is things like Bordy AI, which previously would take a whole dev team and custom APIs and frameworks and architectures to do something like a voice agent. You can now do it in less than an hour with all of these platforms, which is really wild. And the last thing I'll add too is these platforms use their own platforms to have the best support. So if you're opening up Lindy, you're like, I don't want to watch 4 hours of YouTube videos to get started. Lindy literally has a bot where you can ask it questions every step of the way. And it doesn't just give you a general answer, it answers the question based off of like what you're working on. Same thing with Gumloop, one of the most beautiful set of docs I've seen. It'll process all of its docs and give you a personalized answer. So each one of these platforms actually use their own platforms to have a great customer experience. That's just one example. So let's get started. We're gonna do 3 different case study overviews: voice, research, and marketing. We'll tell you the problem that they solve, how they work, and then how you can take those mental models for problems that you might be interested in trying out yourself with no code AI. So the first one is voice. And so in the healthcare space, one of the biggest gaps is a doctor on average has 5 to 7 minutes to spend with a patient. Nurses on average have about 10 to 15 minutes. And so with large hospitals testing out new tools like voice agents, there is a question of how long would a patient want to spend on the phone with an AI? And so you have Rob Allen, the CEO and president of Intermountain Health. They did a huge test with their patients. And on average, it wasn't a 5 minute, like, hey, your appointment is on Tuesday, please come through. The average time patients talk to these agents were 40 minutes or above, 45 minutes. And the reason for that, if you think about it, if you have a specific health journey and you have questions on symptoms, alternative medication, second opinions, this doesn't replace the doctor or the nurse. It just augments what they can't do, answering all of these personal questions. And one of the most important things to note too is when you have something like this that's customer facing, you can always have a loop out that says, hey, you have to call the nurse now. You have to talk to the doctor. Like I'm not a doctor. I can't help you anymore. But it's really amazing to see, especially in healthcare, where we need a little bit more time, information, knowledge, personalized experience. These voice agents can actually help with that. And so while Intermountain Health is a large hospital system that is well funded and can deploy this at scale, working with a nonprofit in Ghana, we're actually testing a small system for them using Lindy, where they're specifically focused on patients with hypertension or high blood pressure. And it's very simple. Every day at 9 a.m., it makes an outbound call to their patients. It has a conversation. They have a specific workflow. Did you take your medication? Do you have any extra questions? And are you thinking about coming to the doctor in the next, like, do you need to come to a doctor in the next week or so? Based off of those questions, after the phone call ends, it summarizes the transcript into an email. The email goes to 2 places: 1, the care team, and 2, the patient's inbox. This creates a log of all of the information that's summarized, so both patients have it and the care team has it. And so when you think about these workflows, there's 3 main parts to a workflow usually. One is the trigger, what activates this. This is a scheduled trigger, so every day at 9. 2, what tools does the workflow use? This uses Twilio to be able to get a phone number so that a phone agent can actually make a phone call. The phone AI agent is just a call to a backend. You can use Claude, you can use Chat, you can use O1, you can use Gemini. It's just saying, hey, based off this transcript, please transcribe the speech to text, send it to an AI, large language model, and then bring it back in voice. Searching a knowledge base. So because they're working with high blood pressure patients, they have a specific set of protocols that they want this AI to reference. And then at the end, sending an email out. And so it makes the phone call, updates the knowledge base based off the phone call, and then also Gmail summary. And then also what it can monitor too is if someone doesn't pick up the phone like more than a week, then a nurse can also check in, or there's things that more actions that organization can take. Here's what it looks like in Lindy. Think of Lindy like Lego blocks. Just like you can take Lego blocks and build everything from like an Eiffel Tower structure to like a whole soccer stadium. Lindy's blocks work very similar. If you can imagine it and just write it down as a recipe, you visually draw it on their canvas. So at the top, you can see there's a recurring schedule trigger. That's the every day at 9 a.m. And Lindy is actually all natural language. So you don't have to code it in Python. You don't have to go between Chat and Lindy being like, how do I make this webhook? Lindy, you just talk to it like you would a human. and then you can connect the different nodes. It makes a phone call. It does the daily patient check-in. It'll search the knowledge base if there's specific medical questions, and it also knows when to end the call. Based off of that, it sends the email afterwards. So a lot of these platforms, they'll use a visual coding environment where it's just like connecting different Lego blocks. In terms of other use cases for voice agent, the number one is customer support. So any FAQ coming in, billing, invoicing, and what usually happens in customer support agents is you triage it just like your customer support team would triage it. So you might have like the invoice workflow. If someone's having trouble with payments or is delayed, that can be a specific workflow, or they're asking for a refund. Or if you have general FAQ, maybe that just searches your knowledge base. And the interesting thing about no-code agents is you can update your knowledge base based off of every phone call. Another popular use case for this is scheduling appointments. So you don't have to have an assistant or someone who's screening all the calls. If someone is scheduling appointments for you, sometimes they want to talk and schedule it versus just use like an online virtual scheduler. So that's very popular. And then also, if you think about the patient check-in, you could also use that for different customer check-ins if you wanted to check in at specific times. Or internally, the CEO of Lindy actually does their weekly stand-ups with their whole team using the voice agent. So everyone gets a 10-minute call. Hey, how's it going? How was your week? What did you ship? What questions do you need help with? Anything else you want to share? And that just creates a massive, it's like having a PM or chief of staff that goes to everyone in the organization, creates a massive list to summarize everything so everyone's on the same page. So there's some other use cases for no-code voice agents. Why use voice agents? One, they're available 24/7. You don't need the graveyard shift for someone at 3 a.m. answering the phone. That's probably one of the biggest use cases. Two, consistent quality. You don't have to monitor the team and evaluate the transcripts to see if people are answering questions right. You build the workflow, it's very easy to see if those workflows are working. And then the last one is being able to use using data to help drive better improvements. That could be in updating better questions because as more customers answer questions and you build the database out, it gets better at answering questions. Or again, if there's a big problem, you now have a full transcript and workflow that you can debug and make decisions off of. You don't have to guess. Some current challenges with no-code voice agents, they're 1 month old, so they're brand new. One, the adjusting to interruptions. As humans, we want to just like cut in. Hey, I have a question. Hey, what that looks like on the no code. That's a harder technical problem in general, but for no code, it generally wants to finish before someone can talk with it. The way around that is you can actually prompt it to say no more than 2 or 3 sentences at a time. So you can actually keep it very short, which makes it feels more natural. The other thing is having complex language. If someone is going off in a very like unique grammar structure or has an accent, that can be hard to realize. The way around that is if someone ever gets frustrated, you can just have a feedback loop out, connect to a human. So again, if something fails, you can have that monitor if that's a specific thing that you'd be worried about for your workflow. And then the last one is maintaining long context for long conversations. So these things work very well at 5, 10, even 15-minute intervals. Get to 45 minutes, it's a little bit bigger of a problem to solve. There are ways around that. A lot of these have memory dumps, so you can actually like get rid of the context as part of the conversation, and also search workflows. So again, there's ways around it, and we were actually just talking about that before this call. So those are voice agents. Again, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We have 2 more cases we're gonna get to, and then we'll answer any questions in the chat. We're gonna keep going. I don't see any questions yet, but drop them in the chat as they come up. So the next one is the research workflow. That was also something that a lot of people asked, like, hey, how can we use agents to research? And so this is just an example of a technical research agent. Every morning at 9 a.m., I've got a series of agents that do reports on the latest papers. And the main problem this solves is there is too much to keep up with. If you're trying to follow up on X thread, on like fundraising announcements, on paper reviews, and just things that make sense that you want to keep up with, there's a lot there. And so this is a very, very simple agent. Every morning at 9 a.m., it does an archive search of the top papers. It'll read through those papers and create a summary that has the high-level summary, which is a little bit easier to read than the abstract. Key takeaways, so the main data, the main claims, answering the so what, like why is this important, and also the link out to the paper. So the reason I wanted to show this is if you can imagine anything you can search online or get access to for whatever database or features your product has, you can create a structured output for whatever that might look like. And so this is just 3 steps: the trigger, the tool, and the action. And the one thing I wanted to show is it's actually a really simple web extraction. You can just, for this one, it uses the archive search. So this is a custom prompt within this node. And it says, hey, for the last 30 days for this specific keyword, keep the format, because if you don't have that format in the URL won't work. But here's what the URL looks like when you go to archive and you search things. And so by being able to do an LLM call based off of the date, because it knows when it's getting triggered, based off of the topic, each one of these have got an AI one, got a BCI one, and have a robotics one. It knows the topic. Based off of that, it'll just update the link, paste it in, scrape the web page, and then bring that back to email. In terms of research, the main use cases for research, the number one main use case ends up being like lead enrichment. So doing research on people you might have phone calls with or people you want to reach out to. You can do general web searches there. You can search their GitHubs. You can do different social searches. And so you can do lead enrichment for what that looks like. You can do competitor research. And so the really interesting thing about doing searches online, you can search Reddit, you can search comments and reviews. You can find all of the negative reviews that people have with some people were asking about like enterprise. How do we compete with large SaaS players? Find where people are complaining online, where people are complaining month over month, become your opportunity. So you can do live competitor research, not just what does their website say or what's their latest YouTube video drop say. You can also do research like what's the negative sentiments online. Let's actually find where people are complaining and let's make that recent, because that'll speak to some opportunities. You can create structured reports, be it PDFs or emails. And then lastly, too, meeting prep ends up being interesting. So the last thing I'll say is probably the biggest update the last 2 weeks, Perplexity AI, which does great search. They just updated their API. So they now have reasoning models like O3 and R1, which are just models that can think through complex problems as an API call. So you can also start doing more complex web searches with an LLM and a tool that's specifically set up for that. Why use research agents? They're scalable. You can have multiple running at once, and you can also extend those workflows to do larger batches. These are very easy to make autonomous and independent. You can even have a PM agent that thinks through problems, and it's also one that has a good handoff ability for multi-agent collaboration. So if you do research based off of the latest papers and you're applying for a grant or you're creating a proposal for a client, you can take that data in and then structure the proposal out. Current challenges with the visual no code platforms. The first one is debugging. If you have a bug error in code, it's very easy to get that error in the command line and figure out what that problem is. With the visual no code, there's a lot happening behind the scenes. So there's some areas that might get stuck and you just have to figure it out. The good news is each one of these platforms has really strong building communities, Slacks and Discords. The founders are responsive. So if you ever have a bug that's like really something you can't get through, you can post in the communities. Reliability is a big thing. This isn't just the no-code platforms. This is any LLM workflow. On average, if you're trying to do a task that needs to be 100% accurate, it might not make sense to use LLMs for the full workflow. You might have to figure out a different system. And so in general, you have to ask yourself, what are tasks where it's okay to be 60 to 80% right? And there's ways to bump that up with different evaluators or different filters in the workflow. But in general, if you're working with LLMs, sometimes it's not quite 100%. So there might have to be either humans in the loop, or you can even have agents that help evaluate to bump up what that looks like. And then the last thing is access to offline knowledge. If you have really specific, obscure knowledge or text you're trying to get to, the no-code AI agents are amazing at searching anything online or in anything you can structure as a database internally or get access to externally. If you're trying to do some offline knowledge, it's a limit for right now. The one way around that is you could have an image agent where you could start scanning things with your phone, uploading that scan, and then parsing it there. But those are some challenges with the research agents. Cool. So we got some questions in the chat. I'm just going to answer those before we jump into the third case study for marketing. Bailey asked, how much would this cost to run at scale, and how good is the voice? For scale, each platform has a set of credits that you can use because they're doing the API calls for the text to speech or Claude. So it's very simple. Everyone has a free tier. So for Lindy, you can build a simple agent and see what the cost is on the free tier, and then you can scale it up to checkout. And so for the healthcare patient agent for one 10-minute call, it was about 50 credits. And at the $50 a month tier for Lindy, that's like their baseline, not the premium one, you get 5,000 credits. So for $50 a month, they can have 100 10-minute calls with different patients. And the last thing I'll say about scale is as you're pushing, if you're trying to do thousands or tens of thousands of calls, different platforms are good for different things. So n8n or gumloop might be better for optimizing that at a larger workflow scale. And happy to chat more if you have a specific question there. How good is the voice? The voice is it in terms of like the best possible for state of the art, like real time API with ChatGPT. If you've used that voice versus like the worst possible, which is like Siri version one. If Siri version one is level one, real-time API with ChatGPT is level 10, which is also the most expensive. These are probably somewhere around a 6 or 7. So they're fun to talk to. They're easier to talk to than the rule-based systems, and they do respond really well for complex questions. It's a very natural sounding voice. If the experience of voice is really important to you, you might want to use a platform that has more flexibility than Lindy, like n8n, and you can actually do your own API calls. So you can integrate things like 11 Labs or other voice frameworks to really get the experience you're looking for in terms of like tonality or specific interactions. So there's a lot of flexibility for the APIs you use there. And then right now, Kingsley asks, are there currently deployed no-code voice agents in the market? Yes. So each one of these platforms has specific case studies for customers that they work with. We've got a few projects that we've been working with different clients, and there's a lot of things available online that'll show how people are using them. I think one of the main differences between no code and some of the larger libraries like 11 Labs that are working on large enterprise scale voice agents, a lot of the no code experiments end up being smaller. So you end up getting like small businesses, startups, solopreneurs using them. So you might have to dig a little bit deeper, but they are live right now and people are using them. So this isn't a theoretical like, hey, the feature is so new, it's in like beta mode. These are live and people are using them right now. So last thing I wanted to add up on for the case study, when looking at marketing, main thing I wanted to leave you with is not a specific case study, but a way of thinking about how to use agents in marketing. A lot of people think it's like automatic posting like Twitter bots or AI avatars like AI synthetic videos. And if you use that mentality, it's kind of like thinking like, hey, in like the 20th century, maybe sending mail or postcards was a good way to advertise your customers. That mentality doesn't work on the age of social media. It's a whole new platform with new functionality and features. And so when thinking about the larger opportunity for agents, think about how do you add direct value to your customer base or prospective customer base. So one, those could be free extra features. We just shipped a skill tree agent that helps read through GitHub repos to provide custom docs for people to build projects. That's free. It is so easy to run that we don't even need to build that in terms of our core product base. We can make that a free offering. Two, help help customers make decisions. If there's their complex question of like, what do we use and what does that look like? You can have an agent evaluate for them to make that decision of who to talk to, someone on the sales team, or where to go. Might be a resource in your docs. And then lastly, act on behalf of the customer. Make their life easier by removing friction. Best example there is the appointment agents. If someone's trying to schedule an appointment, just have them go through. So I know we only have a few minutes left until 10:30. We got some platform updates. We can go through these mental models, but I just want to make sure we have a few minutes or time. If anybody has any questions, drop it in the chat now. We've got a few minutes. We can stay over too. So happy to answer questions too. If you're like, hey, like want to stay a little bit later, but I want to make sure we have some time for any extra questions. If you've got any questions on how to use no code AI in your specific workflows, anything you heard, if you want to hear more, feel free to send in the chat. Cool. Laszlo wants to hear more about number 3. Laszlo, is that production level agents? And feel free to unmute to clarify your question. Or is number 3 something? Oh, for marketing. What about marketing agents do you want to hear?
Well, you really short-shrifted it. I mean, you sort of talked much more extensively on the other models, and here it was like, oh, we got to wrap up. So is
Yep.
there something I'm missing, or
Yeah. So the main thing for the marketing one, rather than give, we can send this along afterwards, but rather than give a specific example for an agent, we wanted to give a mental model, which will help you filter what agents make sense for in marketing. And the reason for that is there's a lot of examples for marketing agents just on these platforms' website. So I'm going to pull up Lindy's website just so you have it. So if you're looking at like more traditional marketing automations, you can go to Lindy's website. There's a lot of case study for how to use it in a traditional marketing sense. The reason we wanted to focus on just that mental model, I don't think enough people are actually thinking about what's the full power of having an LLM that can use tools, make it very cheap to add custom services, and make that actually part of our marketing workflow and pipeline, not part of our core product or a sales motion. And so just one example on that side, I have a twin sister and she's right now she's looking for a color analysis to help like her skin color match her outfits. And the last 2 weeks, she's gone to a nail salon, she's gone to get her nails done, she's gone to a hair salon. How amazing would it be if these small businesses had a free way? If you're getting your nails done based off of color, it could give recommendations for what works for your skin color. If you're getting your hair dyed at a hair salon, say it's just as simple as like a hairstylist taking a photo of you, and then there's different updates there. So you can start thinking about what are these additional functions or features that previously would have taken an engineering team of 5 or 10 people, a large budget, a large timeline, and really compress it to value in the moment. And the last thing I'll say is when you start combining that with, for the color example or the stylist example, imagine every day you could take a photo and get like a thumbs up, hey, that works with your skin tone. Hey, thumbs down, that doesn't work. Now you have a premium feature that's even beyond the marketing of it, which is like, hey, just a free evaluation step, free analysis for you right now. And now you have continued follow-up where you probably could charge for a subscription there. So again, in terms of thinking marketing, we wanted to focus more on the mental models. And if you have a specific question you want to answer around like what you're thinking, happy to do that. Does that help answer a question for a potential idea in marketing?
Yes.
Awesome. So next question is how do large companies using no code with their internal tools and their data, can you integrate them into CRM's ERP? And so for a lot of these platforms, Lindy has over 200 integrations. Gumloop has a lot more, and then same with n8n. Each one of these platforms is set up to be as integrative as possible to current systems. So they integrate things like Salesforce, HubSpot. So if all of your company's enterprise CRM is in a traditional system of record, these integrate with those platforms. So you can build custom workflows based off of the actions and whatever ways that you would work with them if you built like custom APIs out. The one thing I'll share based off of ways of thinking about like what's new in February 2025 for no code is there's a race right now to have no code AI platforms build out more features in no code AI platforms. It's the same thing as if you were using a copilot to code to write more code. And so one specific example here is if there's an integration you're looking for that doesn't exist for something like Gumloop, they actually just built out a custom node builder. You can drop in the docs, you can drop in like the API documentation for a specific platform you want. And if a node doesn't exist on that platform, it'll make you a brand new node that you can keep private to your team, or you can also make public if you want to. So for some of these platforms too, there's ways to do custom integrations. Yeah, awesome. And then Dylan, you want to add a little bit about what webhooks because you had an experience there?
Yeah. I was just gonna say anything you can traditionally code with, get webhooks and API requests, they tend to have support for that. At least I know I worked a lot with n8n, and they have really good support for doing anything you can do in code, you can kind of do there, although it may be a bit convoluted if you start to get into really complex things.
And I think one side, when you start looking at large enterprise data, like privacy and security are important. And right now, we've never lived in a time where open source is competing with closed source models. And so what you can do with something, a platform like n8n, the reason we have that as one of the top three, you can actually self-host workflows on n8n on your own servers. And you can use all open source models that are also run on your own servers. So there's ways where if privacy of data and you don't want to send it to like Anthropic's or OpenAI's servers and you want to keep it locally, there are ways to self-host this too if privacy and security is important. Like I would say that's pretty advanced and niche. In general, all these platforms have extremely secure. The platforms themselves are secure. So if you're using Lindy, it's got general security for data privacy. Cool. Vincent's got a question of would Lindy be the best option to build a newsletter based on summarizing news and current events? Lindy is the best to get started. So if you're like, hey, I haven't built anything, totally would recommend Lindy. In less than an hour, you can go from I have no idea what Lindy is. I just attended this 20, 30-minute intro to full working agent for taking in events, finding them on the web, and then making a newsletter. So I'd recommend Lindy just getting started out of the box. If your kind of newsletter starts processing like hundreds of queries, not dozens of queries or even like a handful of web searches, something like Gumloop might be good for you. So Lindy is the best to get started. That's like the Legos. And then if you have a specific workflow that you find is like really complicated because you're scraping like 100 web pages every day for your newsletter, Gumloop might be the platform to help optimize that at scale. Awesome. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute. The last thing I want to end with is if you're on this call and you're like, hey, I'm tired of just like hearing updates, I want to build. Our main goal is to build the best community layer for people who want to build online. So I'll send this afterwards. We're announcing an AI voice summit at the end of the month. We actually have the CTO of Bordy confirmed, and we're getting a couple more speakers before that's public. You guys will get an invite to that. That's just free. And one of the things we care a lot about is how do we build communities online where people are building, demoing, getting feedback, and actually having something at the end of a certain time. So we're doing our first 2 week no code agent sprint is next week. That's people with no backgrounds who in 2 weeks want to go from 0 to multiple agents and have something that you can use in your personal or professional workflow. We love that you showed up today just to learn. And so for community, we have a 10% off community scholarship. We'll send this over an email afterwards. If you apply by the end of tomorrow, you can get a discount on that 2 week sprint. And the last thing I'll end with is you don't have to spend like dozens of hours in your week or your whole weekend just catching up on what this looks like. All it really takes is 1 hour every week where you just build something. We've been doing this every single day for 1 to 2 hours, depending on the workflow. And so just 1 hour a week on Lindy, you can ship your first agent just to get a sense of, is this something I should spend more time on? Is this something I should get another team member to work with me on? And so our main recommendation is just 1 hour every week, actually build something and use the tools because the things are moving so quickly. What's possible in January 2025 was impossible last quarter. And even just in the last month, the biggest push has been open source R1 reasoning models. And OpenAI has now, on Friday, they released O3 Mini for cheaper than any other previous model. So you now have some of the world's best reasoning that's integrated already into these no-code platforms. These platforms don't sleep. They do the updates for you. And this was just a tweet from the CEO of OpenAI yesterday. He was like, hey, we just released deep research. That wasn't the newest agent on our side. We have more to come. And so the only reason I bring this up is as foundational models get better and what you can call from an API gets better, these no-code platforms also get better. And you don't have to do anything except just change the box from using ChatGPT 4.0 or 1 to use O3 Mini. So it's very easy to see what that looks like. And right now we're in the age of experimentation where you have to kind of build to see if it works for your workflow and if it's getting the results you're expecting, and if not, other ways to change it. Ashwin dropped a question. Can these tools be fine-tuned for continuous learning and self-updating purposes, such as journaling, beyond their application's professional workflow? The short answer is yes. So the interesting thing about these agents is they not only can read from a knowledge base or a database, they can also write to that database. So as you have a texting conversation, a voice conversation, or like if you have a specific messaging like Slackbot, if you have a specific conversation or interface for a journaling workflow, you can log every single entry. And you can do, once it's in a database, you can do other things with it too. You could do analytics every week. You could do sentiment analysis. You could just parse the whole journal into an LLM and just ask, what questions should I ask this person? Ask a new question every day. So you can be able to have continuous learning in the workflows. In terms of fine tuning, that's actually something I don't know. Dylan, do you know, is there any way to fine tune some of these results outside of just context window?
I mean, it depends on the model. Some of them, like they generally are just integrations. So things like OpenAI that have some fine-tuning features would work here, because you just use your API key like you would with any other module.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of where at least OpenAI is taking their access to their API models is you can fine tune vision now. So you can fine tune 4.0 vision, and the benchmark that they have, and we'll just drop the docs in the chat if you want to learn more about the fine tuning specifically through API, Ashwin. One of the things that's really interesting on the vision side, to train a computer vision model, you might need thousands of images that are annotated and then create specific rules based off of those images. So platforms like RoboFlow are amazing from like a no code or light code perspective. What OpenAI's API fine-tuning has been able to do, instead of having thousands of images, you can have dozens of images. And what they showed was in a biomedical setting, when they start having images that, because these models are trained on just all different kinds of data, if you have a small image data set, they were able to get results that previously would have taken thousands of data points. So there are ways to fine tune with either few shot learning or even custom annotated data that's just smaller. So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out the OpenAI API for that. We got a question from Vincent. Does scraping a site work if the page is just headlines, snippets without the full article? Could you share a little bit more, Vincent? Are you talking about, do you want to get the full article, but it's behind a paywall, or can you just scrape the head, the what's available, like the headline? If you're still in the call, Vincent, you want to give a little bit more context? All right, feel free to follow up afterwards. I say I want the agent to read all of the articles on a news page's homepage. I think when you start looking at news pages in particular, there might be certain blocks for scraping because not only do you want access to that, but every single LLM is trying to scrape on the web pages. So sometimes there's human captchas that are getting in the way. Like if you're not human, if you're not logged in, you might not have access to that web page. So if there's a specific web page that you want to scrape, feel free to email us afterwards and we'll see if there's a workaround or a workflow for that. That's not something we've looked at yet, but happy to take some time to see if for whatever news pages you're looking at, see if there's a workaround there. One way around that the gumloop team has used. So remember, gumloop is like the workhorse platform. They've actually made a custom Chrome extension. So for even LinkedIn actually makes it harder to pull in some information and do searches. But because these models are so good, because they're multimodal and they're good at screenshots, one way around that is if you have the Chrome extension, you can just take screenshots or you can quick copy and paste. So there's ways to get around that manually. If you're looking to do it autonomously, again, that's going to depend on the web page. We can check that out afterwards. Awesome. We're here for if you've got a couple follow-up questions or anyone else has any questions. Otherwise, we will end it now.
Did we answer Bailey's? Where do you see this going in the next 3 months?
We did not. Great call. Where do you see this going the next 3 months? I think when you look at voice agent, everything that exists right now is just going to get better. So one example of this for the reasoning models, o1 was good at parsing really hard questions. Like if you're saying, hey, based off the latest material discovery, what are potential paths I could invest in brain computer interfaces if you're a researcher? o1 is really good at that, but it's really expensive. DeepSeek R1 is better at that because it has transparent chain of thought. So you can see how the model broke down the question. It's 5 to 10% the cost of an O1 call, which O3 Mini is also O3 Mini is also competitive at. So in the next 3 months, the capabilities are going to continue to get better, especially in the thinking and reasoning, and everything's going to get cheaper. And that's really because of the closed open source model. So for things you test out now, if you're like, hey, this cost me like $1 to run, $2 to run, maybe that works for now, but I can't do that at scale with like 5,000, 10,000 queries. That's now we're starting to approach the cost of an employee. In the next 3 months, 6 months, things will just continuously get cheaper, really because the open source market is really challenging and choking the closed source market. So things will continue, capabilities will increase, specifically thinking and reasoning, how those plays into agents, and then also cost. Anything you would add, Dylan, from what you've seen?
Maybe. I mean, not necessarily around AI, but for the tools themselves, a lot of them they do allow for custom modules. So like I could see a future where as they grow, you still have coders who are writing the modules, and then the actual platform almost looks like the flow chart or something. You store the architecture is described as this flow chart, and then people go in and there's still like the code in the background, and who knows from there.
Yeah, and I think one potential angle for that, someone asked earlier, like, hey, what are some marketplace opportunities if we're a solopreneur? Being able to sell these workflows, all of these platforms have template ability. So if you figure out something that works, you can either use that and use that for different clients if that's a workflow that you're interested in, or you can add it to the marketplace and it's like creating an app. But now it's an app that's created in natural language that other people can use in natural language. So I think when starting to look at the next 3 to 6 months in the agent space, both for coded and non-coded agents, being able to transfer expert-based recipes or knowledge is going to become extremely valuable. And so what that specifically looked like in the healthcare space, Hippocratic AI has raised $140 million to scale up expert expert agent workflows. So instead of just having every single nurse at every single hospital design like a patient follow-up workflow, they can get some of the best specialists in the world design custom questions, custom knowledge bases, custom tools that says if I could work with 1,000 patients in the next month, this is what I would do. Being able to then use those expert agent workflows and then sell them as a marketplace opportunity, there's so much value there because a lot of the backbone of these agents are usually only as good as the person who can imagine or work through the, you can either like brute force, you're just trying to figure it out, kind of troubleshooting it, or you have 10, 15 years of experience and you just know the system that works for you and you can figure out what to automate or augment for yourself. Awesome. Last call for any questions. Drop them in the chat or unmute.
I think we got one more here with the tools work browser
Oh, you
controllers.
want to go for it?
I think this the self-hosted ones probably either you could write your own modules or maybe you could find someone who had already built one. If you're using the cloud only or ones deployed to the cloud, I would assume the answer is no, at least in the short term. Something like Selenium or Playwright is probably not something they're going to focus on.
Great. That's all the questions we have in the chat. Email us back if you have specific questions. We're happy to help there. If you're interested in actually building and shipping agents, the sprint starts next week. We'll send that info along. And this is not a one-time and done workshop. We've got the Voice Summit coming up, and we're going to plan some other community events. Y'all are going to be the first to know. So thanks for staying on. We are now 16 minutes over. Hope this was helpful. And give us honest feedback. If you're like, hey, we want to see more of this, less of that, or keep this up, Luma asked feedback at the end. We take feedback. We treat it as a gift. We treat it seriously. This is the first of many workshops to come. Give us feedback if this was worth your time or if there's areas to improve. We will read every single one to design the next one. Thanks, y'all, for joining. Have a great week. Bye, everyone.